Content warning. This episode contains discussions of grief, medical trauma, and discriminatory language, which may be distressing for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know needs support, links and contacts for mental health resources can be found in the episode show notes. Hello, Kaya and Wanju. Welcome to Kiind Conversations, where we're simplifying the caring journey one conversation at a time. I'm Teresa, Peer Navigation Lead here at Kiind, and your host. As always, we're here to explore the topics that matter most to parents and carers raising children with disability. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge that we are recording this podcast on the Whadjuk Noongar Budja. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. We have a really exciting episode for our listeners today. First, we have Kiind Peer Navigator Sharon back with us.
Thank you for having me back. Number one episode, our inaugural podcast. Juicy topic, preparing for the new school year. Probably could have made a 5-hour podcast on that one, but we got through it. And it has been really, really lovely to hear the feedback from that first podcast. By all accounts, it's been taken up very well in the community, nationally, not just locally. Wow. It's been lovely to get that sort of feedback, that we are providing value to the community. So on we go.
Absolutely. And the feedback has been lovely. Our second episode, which was Mastering Medical Literacy, which we are going to... this episode is sort of a follow-on from that.
Perfect.
We had one mum say it was like a warm hug.
Oh,
so
I love that.
It's nice to get that feedback to know that we're on the right path for our families.
Yeah.
And now let's welcome our first ever guest to Kiind Conversations, Rachel Callander.
Hi guys, wonderful to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Rachel is a speaker, author and artist who uses her knowledge and lived experience to help families, health professionals and therapy providers work together in a strong partnership. Mm-hmm. We're so grateful for you joining us today.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yeah.
Rachel, our listeners would love to know a little bit more about you. Would you like to share about your experience or maybe even the journey of becoming a friend of Kiind?
Yeah, for sure. It's quite an interesting journey, actually. I'm originally from New Zealand and I've been living in Perth for the last 8 years. I was a wedding and portrait photographer by trade, and I had my own business in New Zealand and loved photographing people and weddings and all things wonderful. And then I had a little daughter called Evie, who was born with a very rare chromosome condition. And that threw me into the world of medicine, disability, and big scary words, essentially. And now in my work as a communication consultant with healthcare professionals, I've been able to use my experience with being Evie's mum and the knowledge that I gained from her and that experience to help educate healthcare providers and families to build positive relationships. I'm very passionate about that, and I know we're going to be getting into that, but that's a little bit of my background, just bringing kind of everything that I've done and been through into this really beautiful, powerful space.
Awesome. And I think the lovely thing to share, and we're probably going to touch on it a little bit in the discussion as well, is that you worked with Kiind for the Superpower Kids book.
I know, that was such an amazing project, and it was the follow-up initiative from a book I'd made in New Zealand called Superpower Baby Project. But when the CEO, Carrie Clark, said, let's do something with Kiind, and we jumped at this amazing opportunity. So my husband and I photographed 33 families from the Kiind community that wanted to be part of it. And it was launched at the Awesome Arts Festival in 2019. And I know that book it's literally travelled the world now. I've been taking it places, and it's in schools, and it's really changing the conversation around ability and disability, and it's bringing awareness to the unique capabilities of all children. And I think it's a tool to help parents really see the beauty and uniqueness in their children as well, when a lot of those conversations are quite negative.
Absolutely. And we talk about it quite a bit. There's some conversations that families need to have. I'm particularly talking about NDIS, and we share with families, you sort of have to be talking about your child's worst day. So it becomes that negative conversation. Whereas I think something like Superpower Kids helps families to, and we're going to be touching on this in the podcast, about how you can talk about the positives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that kind of might lead into the importance of partnerships. And I think that the language that we use around our children and about our children can help inform those relationships, because parents hold so much knowledge about their child.
Yeah.
That often isn't respected by healthcare professionals. That, you can be dismissed. I can see you nodding there, Sharon.
Yeah. This is a recurring theme, Rachel, through every topic. I'm sure every podcast we have, this will come up again and again and again.
Yeah, mothers especially are dismissed. You're just a mother, or if they're worried, then they're labelled
they're neurotic.
Anxious mother. And it's horrible.
Yeah.
People don't like going to hospital generally. It's not a fun place to be. It's not somewhere where you want to go on purpose, And so if you're there and you need therapy, you really do need help. And so the knowledge of families and parents and caregivers really does need to be respected and acknowledged, because how on earth is a care team going to wrap around them accurately or meaningfully?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And
you
I
are
think
the expert of your child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good space to also share that we recognise, that everyone has different experiences within their healthcare and through, therapy supports. Everyone's experience is not going to be the same. And so what we're going to do in this discussion is do our best to address those sort of varieties of concerns that come up for families in those settings. And for families, just to remember that if you have any questions at all, that we are here, the Kiind team is here to support you with what you need. You can book in a pathway session so you can catch up with us one-on-one, share what you're experiencing in those different settings, and we can link you with the information that you need. And there'll also be some links and the link to book that appointment on the show notes as well. So ladies, let's get into it. Rachel is here to help guide parents and carers on how to build positive relationships with their child's medical and therapy teams and become more empowered advocates. We've touched on this in previous podcasts. Having a relationship of mutual respect from the beginning can help you achieve the best outcomes for your family and advocate effectively on your child's behalf. So Rachel, you've got lots of experience and knowledge when it comes to building relationships with doctors and medical teams, as you've started to chat about. So I think that's a good place for us to start. So could you tell us a little bit more about those experiences?
Yeah, for sure. I love sharing my story and love talking about Evie. I do need to let the listeners know that Evie passed away in 2010 at the age of 2.5. So I have experienced, child loss and bereavement. But it's a powerful space to be in, to use this experience in a way that can empower other parents and hopefully provide them with some hope and encouragement, but also for healthcare professionals. And this is what I've learned as well. No one goes to work on purpose to do a bad job or to hurt somebody. And I think our communication and the way that we are connecting with each other is often getting in the way of our very well-meaning intentions often. But with Evie, what I learned was that I loved the healthcare professionals and therapy providers that came on the journey essentially with me, that saw that I had some knowledge and respected it and wanted to help me enhance it. They were the ones that saw how creative we were trying to be in helping Evie. So Evie never walked, but she used to scoot on the floor on her back to get around, and it was, super cute, but she was wearing the back of her hair out, and so it wasn't safe because her poor scalp would bleed. And so, just an example, our beautiful occupational therapist was thinking, well, what can we do to make this movement safe, because this is how she's independent.
Yeah.
And so we tried little skateboards that we'd stick her on and she could push off and it would wheel around, but she kept rolling off, and all sorts of different things, and putting wheels on bath seats and all kinds of things. And she was really encouraging, and she kept saying, you're doing so well at trying to figure this out. I want to help you figure this out. And then in the end, she called up the guy that makes the soft headgear for the All Blacks, and got this amazing tiny pink soft little headgear thing that Evie loved. She didn't throw it off, it was stuck to her. And so she would wear this little soft headgear and then scoot around on the floor and be completely free. And it was just a beautiful example of where knowledge is respected and a need is identified, you can create some really powerful, meaningful pathways.
Yeah, and the value of thinking outside the box,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
There's not always answers there, but if you're allowed to be creative and you've got the support of, like you say, other professionals who are just saying can't be done, but going, all right, well, let's keep looking at
try something.
Yeah,
I mean, and we had been given a piece of equipment that was a standing frame because, Evie's nearly 3 and she wasn't standing or walking. And so it looked archaic. I hated this piece of equipment. It was so ugly and it was so awful, and metallic straps, and I'd stick her in, and she just had to stand there. She couldn't do anything. She literally couldn't move, and it felt like a boring torture chamber.
Yeah.
Cost probably quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
But, sometimes I think parents and children are forced on pathways that isn't right for them, and often at the wrong time. And I think parents need to feel empowered that they can question that or challenge that and go, actually, where is my child safest and most happy? Can we not try and fund for that?
Yeah, and I think going back to the point you're saying, mainly mothers, because we are not conditioned to be assertive, particularly against authority. So you really have to sort of go outside your comfort zone to become a powerful advocate for your child. Of all the difficulties that come with having a child with a disability, that is one thing. You learn to find your raw. Right?
Yeah.
Because you have to.
Exactly.
Your child can't advocate for themselves. So, you just have to learn to be assertive and hold your ground and assert your authority as the expert of your child.
Definitely. And it doesn't have to be aggressive,
No,
and some people might
all.
even find it hard to go, I don't even know how to find my raw. I don't even know if I have a raw. But it's just about being, I guess, confident in what you know.
Absolutely.
And then being able to voice it. And we'll talk a little bit about how you might do that in this podcast too.
Yep.
Yeah. Great point, Sharon.
And I think, from what you're saying, with finding our raw and, the emotions that come up from that, there is a broad range of emotions that come up for families during this engagement with their medical teams.
Definitely.
And I think it's nice to acknowledge that, not all days are going to be great.
No. And just on that, when you receive a diagnosis, your world completely changes, and I liken it to the fact I've often said, a death has occurred, like the child you're expecting no longer exists, and then this whole new world to navigate, and it's terrifying, it's uncertain, and you are in a state of shock and trauma, and you lose the capacity to be able to process things because you're highly emotional, your rationality kind of is diminished, let's just say. You even can lose up to 40 IQ points when you're in such a state of trauma and shock. And so when healthcare professionals are, exactly.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Right. And if they're sharing all of their information and you don't understand, like they're talking medicine language and you speak regular language, you're not even speaking the same language, right? And so it's really hard to have that confidence when you're confused most of the time.
Gosh, you don't think about emotion having that much impact on your cognition.
Exactly. And I hope the mothers out there listening and, and the carers out there can go, oh my gosh, I can give myself a little bit of slack and stop beating myself up for not understanding or not having it all together. Like nobody does. And like you've mentioned, there's so much going on that your poor brain is literally shutting down to protect itself.
To survive. Exactly. It's a survival mechanism. Yeah. It's not a fault.
No. And so that's often with my work with healthcare professionals and providers as well, is to make sure that the information they're sharing is being understood. Have they delivered it in a way that's clear and that's kind and that is taking into account the whole picture rather than just the body part they might be working on,
Absolutely. You've just done a podcast on this very, very thing because it is so important.
Yeah. The other podcast, we talked about, feeling prepared when you're going into meetings, having your questions written down, keeping those records.
Having another person with you for exactly that reason, because their cognitive faculties might be a bit better than yours in that moment, so you've got someone else to say, oh, actually this is what they said, or someone to scribe for you. Or,
definitely, or even ask to record the session, I know a lot of healthcare providers are more than happy for that. Whatever works for you. And to not be the one solely responsible for all of the information, because that is a huge burden. And over time it can become unbearable, and you end up isolating yourself as being the only expert.
Yes, yeah, that's so true.
And then that's really hard to ask for help, because people won't know how to help you, because you're kind of far down the track of, and it's almost too hard to help, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a particular challenge for single parents, single mums.
Absolutely.
Usually. That enormous burden to be the absolute knowledge keeper. But there's an enormous anxiety that comes with that, because what if something happens to me?
Exactly.
Right? Which is one of the things that keeps parents awake at night anyway, right? When you get a child who's that diagnosis, that's the thing that you're lying awake at night.
Absolutely.
And then, like you say, you're just accumulating more and more knowledge as time goes on. So it becomes more pertinent as time goes on that somebody else can access or use that information. It's really important for people to know that they can divvy out. You know?
Yes.
But I think the system creates this enormous burden that you feel there's like an isolating process that happens, that you just become more and more in your mind sure that you are the only person who can hold it, you know. So you've got to let go, and there's anxiety with that too, right?
Definitely.
So there's a lot going on for people.
There's so much going on, and a lot of mothers find a sense of security and control.
That's exactly right.
To help them feel safe.
Absolutely.
And so, but it ends up hurting them in the long run, because then they are isolated, like you say. So, being brave and courageous to delegate even little things.
Yep.
Even if you're more than capable of doing them.
Yeah, do it anyway.
Seriously, that's one of the things I hear again and again from parents is, I wish I had asked for help sooner. It's one of the things I regret.
Yep.
Hi, Teresa here, Peer Navigation Lead at Kiind. Just interrupting the episode. I hope you're enjoying it and learning lots from Rachel and the team. I just wanted to remind you that Kiind is here for you and your family, no matter where you are in the journey. One of the ways we can help is with a pathway planning session. During these free sessions with either myself or another peer navigator, we will discuss your child's needs and find supports and information that you might be needing. And we can also help you navigate complex systems like NDIS, education and health. Pathway planning sessions are available on the phone or via video. And to book, visit our website, kiind.com.au. Now let's get back to the episode. So when we talk about, building that relationship with our medical teams, there's lots of things that lots of tools that families can use. And I suppose record keeping is a great way for families to be able to keep up to date, to share information with their circle as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's critical, and whatever system works for you is what's going to work. Some people are very, digital. Some people love paper. I still think that a bit of paper, a drawer somewhere or a filing cabinet or a folder. I used to have a big folder of everything, and if I didn't understand something, I'd write notes on it. And then if other people know where that is, then you know that there's somewhere to go with, even just basics like phone numbers of hospitals and doctors that are working with your child.
Yeah, and can we also acknowledge the fact that there are many families out there who have more than one child with a disability? They've got filing cabinets worth of information. We work with some families that have 5 children with various disabilities. It's a huge amount of information to keep track of. Particularly if you down the track are looking to apply for NDIS, they want all the evidence. So that just information keeping itself is a big job.
Exactly, which again is often the burden of care. It's all of the extra everything,
the invisible labour.
Yeah, exactly. It's huge.
I remember having a pathway planning session with a mum and 3 children with a disability, and she had little bits to talk about each one. She wanted some, had some questions around each one. And I was just amazed that this mum could go back and forth. But I'd be going, are we talking about number 1 or number 2 now? And she's like, oh no, that's number 2 because this is what I need to know for that person, and this is what I need to know for that person. And it was just amazing that she was so agile, because I don't think I would be able to do that in those situations.
That's pretty impressive.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that, finding a system that works in the long on the long road as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I go to my parents' house. My sister's in her late 50s, and there's a filing cabinet because my mum collects everything. So, yeah, you can find the whole history. And when NDIS want to know about her birth at, 58 years old, mum can pull that out.
It's amazing. Yeah. And organisation it's a form of empowerment as well.
Yeah.
And people have different ways of doing that. But, yeah, I used to have a math teacher that said, before you get anything, get organised. Okay. I still have that in my head.
That's a mantra for life,
it's
right?
It's a good mantra. And it's challenging and it can take a lot of time, but it is, it's a necessity for coping and for that sense of control and understanding and not being overwhelmed and just...
Yeah. And I think particularly for those parents listening who are overwhelmed, sleep deprived.
Oh my gosh.
Don't we all know about the sleep deprivation? We talk about the loss of 40 IQ. Add sleep deprivation, how many more IQ points have you just lost? And then, of course, a lot of the parents we work with are also neurodiverse or might have their own executive function challenges and organisational challenges. So it might mean that they need to Google ideas because it doesn't come naturally to them, or get a friend who's a really great organiser. Normally everybody knows one person at least that's their thing, So we acknowledge also that this doesn't come naturally to many people, actually.
I think it's such an important point, especially when it comes to building positive relationships with your team. Because every person is different, everyone's going to look different, their needs are different. And I think for a parent or caregiver to acknowledge the challenge that the healthcare providers face and kind of coming into very different scenarios day in, day out, it's a lot for them to hold as well and to understand. But then for the families and for the parents and carers, the way they need things could be very different from how it was just delivered at somebody else's last session. So it's really important to be honest about what you need. And so one of the frameworks that I teach around this is helping healthcare providers ask really powerful questions and not just assume things and put children on pathways and parents on boxes and then you end up in a not great space relationship-wise. And for parents to be really honest about what they need as well. And that takes some self-reflection and knowledge, but it's about being brave. But essentially I have a framework and I call them empowering questions, and I kind of break all of the possible questions into 4 overarching themes, which are: what are you proud of? What do you hope for? What are you afraid of? And what do you need? And if I was to ask, Teresa, what are you afraid of? You're like, well, actually, that's a big question, or,
I don't think we've got enough time.
Exactly, but
that's another podcast.
It's another
Teresa's
podcast,
fears.
But it's too big to be useful. Or if I said, Sharon, what do you need? Like, well, Rachel, what have you got? I'll take it all. It's not useful, and so sometimes I think we're being asked, especially as families, the wrong questions that aren't useful, and that we end up on pathways that we don't want to end up on. And the same with NDIS, they have very specific questions, and then you feel squished into a little box, and you're like, well, actually, what about all of these amazing things that I want to focus on, but I'm not allowed to because the questions are, I think,
corralling me in a direction that's not helpful.
But I think we do need to be asked these 4 kinds of questions. So in workshops with healthcare professionals, I get them to come up with as many different ways of asking those questions to find alignment with the values of the family, with the needs of the child, and with what quality of life looks like, and what joy looks like for the family, and what their absolute pressing needs are, but in a way that is easy to answer, essentially. So I can share some examples if you like. My handy dandy bits of paper here. There's hundreds of them, but I've just circled a few. And so instead of asking, what are you proud of, which I still think that's a nice question, but sometimes parents are so overwhelmed that they're like, what do you mean proud of? I'm not proud of anything, this is so hard, I can't.
Yeah. I'm not coping as a mum,
I'm not
so
coping,
I
can't. But even for a healthcare provider to come in and ask, what's already working, that then... imagine being asked that as a family, with these 3 children or 5 children, as you're saying, what's already working? Yeah. And the mother might go, well, actually, barely anything, but this one thing is. Yeah. And then she feels seen and heard and validated, and then the healthcare team knows, okay, here clearly is some capability and we can help work on that, and we can encourage and support this mother for doing a really good job.
Yeah.
Because who else tells the mother she's doing a really good job? Like, nobody often. And what can we enhance about this that's already working, you know? And what works with your family, you know? What are the dynamics? So all these beautiful questions, what makes you feel your best, you know? There's some really powerful questions in here. And then in the what do you hope for question, again, that's sort of speaking to capability and future thinking. You know, a question like, what would quality of life look like for you? And it could be very different from the painting that's being painted on the NDIS form. And then all of a sudden you think, oh my gosh, how did we end up with this plan when we really need this thing?
Yeah.
Because the wrong questions haven't, they have been asked. What would you like more of in your life? You know, imagine being asked those kind of questions. And then the fear questions, I think, are really important. And I remember when my own healthcare team asked me these kinds of questions with Evie, because Evie had a lot of respiratory issues, among other things. Like she would often, she would choke and vomit and then sort of breathe all the vomit back in and stop breathing, essentially. So it was pretty scary, and it happened so often. And I got very good at calling the ambulance, and it was the thing that sent us to hospital all the time. And one day I remember our team said, look, what's keeping you up at night? Or I was able to say, look, I am terrified of going to sleep myself, because what if this happens at night and I fall asleep and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, and it would be my fault, you know. And so they really heard my big dark fears about this. And often we carry big dark fears around and we don't speak them out. You know, there are known, unspoken things that can torture us. Anyway, they listened to me and they said, right, we're going to send you home with 2 pieces of equipment. One is a sucker machine and one's an oxygen machine. So when she vomits, you can kind of turn the sucker machine on and suck all the goo out and then stick the oxygen on her nose and then call the ambulance, and you'll know that you're doing everything you can for her while the ambulance comes and, you know, she's getting oxygen and all the rest of it. But the beautiful thing about this was them listening to my big, deep fears. Whenever Evie did vomit and we, you know, did the sucking and the oxygen, sometimes I could manage so well at home, I didn't even need to call the ambulance. We didn't even need to go into hospital. So it reduced the cost of care, which is a big thing for, you know, the system, which was amazing. So being brave and being able to share these big things can help relieve that pressure and burden, and you're able to voice some of the stuff that actually needs critical attention.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. The final question I think is the most important, and it's, what do you need? And it's a hard question to answer. If someone comes to a parent and says, what do you need? Or just text me if you need anything. You know, nobody's going to respond because it's too big to be useful. It needs to be more nuanced. And this is absolutely what I help healthcare providers and also parents understand, is that when you break things into smaller pieces, it's easier to answer, essentially. But one of my favorites from the what do you need piece of paper here, I've got hundreds of questions, is what makes your day harder than it needs to be? Ooh, so imagine a parent being asked that from a healthcare provider or even a family member, and then them being able to be really honest and going, you know, this bit's really challenging. And then the healthcare team going, well, let's wrap some support around that. Let's think of ways to do that. So it's just little examples of how being intentional with our communication, asking powerful, nuanced questions can be great for both healthcare professional and provider and the families and parents with their children.
And the information, the questions that you've been chatting about, we're going to be popping those into the show notes.
Yeah, excellent. And I encourage families out there to look at them and go through the list of questions. There's a lot of them, so hopefully you won't be too overwhelmed. But the idea is that maybe you read through them and kind of highlight 1 or 2 from each section and answer them. And then when your therapy team is with you, show them, look, this is what I'm proud of and we don't get to talk about with my child. Like, these are the things that I think are working really well and would love some more support. These are our hopes for the future, and this is what quality of life would look like. Can you help provide that? Or this is the thing that's keeping me awake at night. What can we do to help mitigate that? And this thing is just driving me crazy. It's making my day really hard. Can we get some support, So imagine a session starting off with those really powerful things. I feel like that's where quality care can be delivered and the relationship can be built because everyone's being honest about what's going on for them.
Yeah. Being human instead of clinical too, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and because I was thinking, when we first started that chat, you've got medical providers that are coming in with their own idea of what a good life looks like.
And yes.
And that might be completely different to yours.
Exactly. And I think this is a huge chat around bias and, disability and, perceptions
ableism.
And assumptions and ableism, all those big things. Yeah. But this makes it really nuanced and personal, and it doesn't take more time.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. That's the other thing. Like, confusion is a thing that wastes time, and being on the wrong pathway and doing things badly. This is accurate and nuanced. And,
I love that.
People can understand.
So true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's amazing things for families to look over and take into their appointments. And I think this is a good place to now have a bit of a chat about what of those skills and strategies can families take into their therapy appointments as well.
Yeah, well, I think if they have had the opportunity to look through some of these questions and answer them, then hopefully they would be able to say things like, look, this is really working for us. We'd love to be able to extend whatever this is that's working. So in my own life with Evie, just because examples are way more fun to talk about, it was the fact that she was independent. That was something that was really important to us. And I was able to say, we're not using this big, ugly, mechanical thing. Can we try and help her to stand and to start walking, but in a way that is gentle and kind and when it suits her? And I didn't mind that she wasn't walking as long as she was free, essentially. So that's the other thing, is like when you come into a therapy session, when you know what you value and when you know what your child values and loves, you want therapy to support those things, but also to kind of help with some of the challenges as well, but not in a way that diminishes that child's humanity and sense of self. So wrapping support around strengths, I think, is always a powerful way to go. Or even I had a story of a young boy. He wanted to be an astronaut and he had Duchenne muscular dystrophy, so chances are he might never be an astronaut. But the therapy team around him created experiences, so no matter what they were doing with this little boy, it was like, well, this is to help you become an astronaut. We need to help you stretch your arms because you need to, wipe your bottom, or you need to eat this thing, or you need to try this new thing, or reach this. And it was all around supporting him to become as close to being an astronaut as possible, which is amazing. It doesn't actually matter that he might never be an astronaut because everything was geared around that thing that he loved.
Yeah.
Which is a beautiful way to approach therapy, I think.
Yeah. That's a lovely example of how therapy teams can support families, and we get the privilege of seeing that nearly every day at work. Yeah, we are along the journey with a lot of families, and we get to see those benefits, the outcomes of therapy. The fact that some little person is told, or the family is told, that little person is never going to walk again, and yet here's this little person 5 years later walking down to see us at the office at Perth Children's Hospital. So it's so lovely to see the outcomes of those really positive relationships with therapy, and we get to be part of it.
There are an incredible community of professionals out there who are passionate, committed, and just can really transform a child's life, which transforms the whole family's life. Many miracles happening out there. I think it's always really valuable, as we said before, to acknowledge that these people are coming with great intentions, but also often a wealth of knowledge and expertise, which is why you work as a team. You've got yours, they've got theirs.
Yeah. I remember having a chat to a mum who really advocated so well for her little person, and the little person was only 4. And she got a great NDIS plan, and we were having a bit of a chat around what the different words were in the plan and potentially of what she could use that funding for. And she kind of went a bit quiet and she said, oh, but he's only 4. When does he get to, if you're talking about therapy 3 times a week, because that's what I can afford, when does he get to be a 4-year-old?
Yeah.
And I said, well, you don't have to go on this path if you're both not ready for it.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, so he can just be a little 4-year-old for a little while. And I said, well, yeah, if that's what you want.
Amazing.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot, don't we? That this enormous pressure on families, particularly if a child is diagnosed young, around early intervention. The pressure is enormous on families because access to those supports, those early intervention supports, are not easy to access. So the emotional burden that creates for parents, that they're missing this tiny little window of opportunity. Also, a quick segue before I forget, it's probably important to acknowledge that there are families out there listening whose children will not engage, no matter how much they try, with therapies, supports. They might have got the best U-Butte NDIS plan package, funded up the wazoo, and kid won't engage. So just want to let families listening know we see you out there. We know you exist. Yeah. So we haven't forgotten about you. That's another podcast.
Yeah, because you can, go on that pathway and build a really good relationship with the therapist. But if your child won't,
some kids won't, and you know what? It's their life.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I remember I heard a beautiful phrase from a surgeon actually that was working on Evie at one point. She was in a very bad way, and just to this point, she said, just because we can do certain things doesn't mean we should.
Yeah.
And I think that parents can, take that on board for themselves as well. And I think it comes down to, again, not comparing yourself with other families and, what is working, what's going to be the best for you. And it could be something you haven't even thought about yet.
Yeah. I think, it's important for parents to know that they can say no, that there is only one shot at a childhood. And play and time to just be without being therapized constantly. If you don't feel that's in your child's best interest, you're allowed to say no. Providers, medical, allied health professionals bring, a range of skills and knowledge that are really, really valuable. And we need to acknowledge that. But you are the expert knowledge holder of your child, and it's all right for you to say time out. I think that's really important. And I think the other thing to acknowledge at this point is that particularly if there's a team, and often there is a team, it's not just one provider, you're part of a team. You are literally a member of that team. You're not a passive recipient. You are an active member of the team. Also, you are the expert knowledge holder, so you're actually really a valuable member of that team, and you're paying the bills, right? That's really, really valuable member of the team, right? So it's probably a good thing to remember if you're feeling that you're not contributing value. You absolutely are, and you shouldn't be made to feel that you're not.
And I think the nice thing about having a therapy team on board with you is, helping you to navigate. Like you said, they're bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
And, they're also bringing all of those interactions that they've had with other families. So it's like a font of knowledge. Yep. So having them along the journey, building that relationship with them, absolutely sharing what you want out of the session. I think, embrace it, because it's like having a little therapy encyclopedia along the journey.
It's collaborative. Yeah.
Definitely. I think I love that word collaborative. I think it's so important, and I think the one of the best ways of being collaborative is for parents to feel encouraged to be honest about why they might be choosing things. Sometimes I think healthcare providers can be, they have a certain way that they like to do things or have done things in the past, and then, you know, there might be a family that wants to do something differently, and that can cause a conflict or a clashing. But I think if you understand where each other's coming from, which is a conversation, it can build even more powerful collaboration. So I think...
Absolutely. And then that therapist gets to take that knowledge and experience forward.
Exactly.
So you've now been a teacher.
Yeah. I think, communication is just vital for everything, and good communication is critical in
Which
these
can
spaces.
be hard when you're
absolutely
stressed,
hard.
grief-stricken, sleep-deprived. You know, you're sort of a band of regulation emotionally isn't at the best, so your tolerance, you know, for stress is often quite low. So that give yourself a break again, but you have to, I think, you know, going back to that point that people who are trying to help are coming with all the best intention in the world.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And they're not there to intentionally do a bad job or to hurt
Exactly.
you.
Yeah. And I think, you know, coming back to, you know, we're chatting about building that relationship with therapy teams. I think they're quite unique in that you can engage with a therapy provider in their office. The therapy provider might go to your child's school, so the therapy is happening while you're not there. They might even come to your house. So there's quite a unique nuance to that relationship with a therapy team that you wouldn't have with a medical team. So I can see that there's some ways in which, making sure that you're quite comfortable with the therapy team is going to be even more important in those scenarios.
Yeah, definitely, especially if they're coming into your home. Absolutely. And Sharon, you might have more experience with this.
Too much. Well, and also I was thinking in school, you know, suddenly you've got essentially an advocate for you in the school system, a therapy. So, you know, often an OT will be going into schools to support your child to manage in the class. So it's, you know, that relationship with that service provider is really, really critical, because if you're not there to advocate for your child, you want that person to have your child's back.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
In the home, again, you know, I just think, you know, there's so many pressures going back to that early intervention pressure, and you know, if you'll get a plan and it's speech, OT, psych, and a lot of it will often be in your home. It's quite invasive, you know, it's quite invasive to have people who are constantly, so you really do need to have a good relationship. And I think the other thing that really, really is essential is to remember that your home is your child's safe space. So if people are going to be spending time in your home, they need to make sure that those experiences are optimal and pleasant and enjoyable. And if that can't be done, then that's a real problem. That's a real problem. Every child is entitled to have that one place in the world that's safe, and that's their home, you know. So it can get tricky. It can get tricky, and particularly if you're a bit like me, where you can't bear the idea of someone coming into a messy house, you know. So you got to run around cleaning before they get there. You know, one more pressure to add to the load. It's a lot for families. It's a lot. Hi everyone, it's Sharon from the Kiind Peer Navigation team. I hope you're gaining some confidence and new knowledge from this episode. We're just taking a break to let listeners know about our What's On activity and event guide. This is a newsletter sent straight to your inbox each week. It's packed with inclusive community activities for families raising children with disabilities. We can connect you to many free and low-cost opportunities like school holiday programs, sporting events, art and cultural activities, and more. To see what's on, visit our website at kiind.com.au and do not forget to subscribe. Let's get back to the episode.
Thank you both. I know the information will be really helpful to our listeners. So, Rachel, for those families who can struggle with speaking up when they have concerns, can you share how to help them feel more empowered?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think it could be a whole different range of things, writing things down before you have your appointment, or even making note of things as they come up. So you might be concerned something might happen and then your therapy appointment's not for another week and then you forget, so being able to capture the things that you're concerned about as they're happening is a powerful way to collect them, and then framing them in order of priority, essentially. But just even being able to start the conversation with a healthcare provider or a team, just saying, this is what I've noticed. I really need some support. What do you think we can do here? And it's not loud or aggressive. It's just honest and courageous. Writing things down, having someone else, we've talked about this, that you've shared these things with. Because these are the known unspoken fears that we carry, and I think you need to voice those essentially, or they'll eat you up inside.
And I think that means having an exercise book or a diary or something and a pen on your bedside table. So in the middle of the night when you're lying awake, obsessing often, going around and around and around and keeping yourself in a bit of a state of a panic, you can literally write it down and let it go. I've recorded it. I can't do anything more about it right now, but it's there, and I'll address it tomorrow or the day after when I see, Sandy or Sam or whoever. But I agree. I think writing down is not just a great way to remember, but a good way to almost externalise it.
Definitely, yeah. Because it's such a burden, and your own mental well-being can plummet. And so looking after yourself, like parents really also, a huge way of advocating for their child is also looking after themselves. Self-care, that can look different for lots of people. And knowing what that is and knowing what you need to fill your energy tank up. It could be, how am I going to get some sleep? If you're not sleeping well, and how can you get some support for sleep? And even bringing this up with your care team, because you are your child's number one important person in their life, and if anything happens to you, then it impacts on everybody. So it's really important that the therapy team knows how you're doing as a parent as well.
When families do have a concern, it can be hard to be brave and speak up. But I think it's really important, not only for building the relationship, but for the future service for not just your family but others. I used to work in complaints handling, so complaints are a gift. Being brave and bold and sharing when it's uncomfortable, because we don't want to tell people that things aren't going quite right and not in the way that you want them to go, it can be really a difficult conversation. But if you can be bold and speak up for yourself, then there can be change not just for you but for other families down the line as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
We hope everyone listening today has found this episode helpful and that you're feeling more confident and empowered to navigate these important relationships. So Rachel, before we finish up each episode, we like to leave our listeners with a little pearl of wisdom. So I'm going to put Sharon on the spot and get her to go first, because she has shared some amazing pearls of wisdom in past podcasts.
Thank you.
So, what can you leave families with after the discussion today?
I feel like I'll probably say this as my pearl of wisdom for every podcast, and that is, you are the expert of your child. But I would also like to reinforce, particularly around this topic, that this is a marathon, not a sprint in many, many cases. You really need to just take things day by day. It's very, very difficult, particularly at 2:00 in the morning, not to project way into the future and put yourself into a panic attack. Just trying to stay in the present, deal with what you can, let go of what you can't, and breathe. As I always say, breathe.
Yeah.
That's kind of important too.
Yeah, it really is.
Don't hold your breath.
And Rachel, would you like to share a pearl for families?
Pearl, I think The thing that I guess has changed my whole trajectory of life, Evie, she completely hijacked my wedding and portrait photography career in New Zealand, but it was all because of language, essentially. The Superpower Baby Project and Superpower Kids was all around finding positive language to describe my child and, children like Evie, because as soon as a parent is given a diagnosis, often those diagnosis words that we hear a lot in disability space, like disabled, dysmorphic, abnormal, defective, mutated, they're heavy words, and I think if a person hears these words enough, they start to believe that that's who they are. But I always share that you can't be diagnosed with your identity. A diagnosis will shape how you live your life, but it is not who you are. And I think finding new language to describe your children and parents, you are allowed to speak positively about your children.
Amen.
Because it changes the conversations that you have with strangers. I used to get asked all the time, what's wrong with your child? And initially I'd kind of say, well, she's got partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6, and she's got multiple ventricular septal defects, and she can't walk and she can't talk. And that poor stranger just glazed over and didn't learn anything about Evie. But when I was able to tell that stranger, well, actually nothing's wrong with her. Here's what we love to do. These are her superpowers, essentially. Let me share about Evie. They then looked at her differently and saw a human being, because I described a human being.
Yeah.
Not a collection of failing body parts and something to be afraid of. So our language matters. And I think the sooner you can start speaking human language around your child, the better.
So true.
Yeah. And I can see how that would just really support your relationship with your medical team, your therapy
Definitely.
team, all of those people that you come into contact with every day. It's just going to improve all of those relationships.
Yeah, it did. And it did with Evie too, when, the healthcare team knew of Evie's superpowers, which were that she loved being on a beanbag, and couldn't talk, but we could communicate without words. She had the most delicious little giggle. She didn't eat food at all, solid food, but she had a special vanilla flavoured formula, so her breath smelled amazing all the time. So just all these little things, and the healthcare team knew that about Evie too and would talk about it. And so it built trust and rapport, and we were speaking the same language. And then I learned the medicine language, because you do as a parent, you learn it. And it takes time. You're learning literally a new language. So not to beat yourself up if you can't remember everything. But you're also allowed to teach the healthcare providers and team around you the language that you want used around your child as well. Yeah.
Oh, perfect, yes. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Rachel, we can't thank you enough for being our first guest on Kiind Conversations.
You're so welcome. It's such an honour.
And it's such a joy to have you join us and share all of this important information with our families. For links and resources mentioned in today's episodes, check out the show notes and stay tuned for our next episode. If you don't want to miss it, make sure you're following all of our socials. And remember, the Kiind team is here for you. If you'd like one-on-one support to help you navigate any issues that your family may be dealing with, you can book a free pathway planning session with us. The link will also be in the show notes. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, we'd love to hear them, so please email us at hello@kiind.com.au. Thanks for joining the conversation with us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks so much, Rachel.
You're welcome.
It's good to see you.
I know.
Good to see you in person.